Recharging has to be one of the most important subjects when considering an EV, and in particular charging time is probably one of the most controversial topics we might need to cover. So why haven't I done so far? Well, it's taken a long time to get all the recordings I need together, but I am finally there, and therefore that is the subject of today's video. This video has been somewhat long in the making, so apologies for that. There are a surprising number of things to record, and I've had a few recording failures and a few faux pas on my part. However, I do now have my ducks in a row, and we can now look at recharging time in this video. What I'd like to do is compare two stops, one in an internal combustion engine car and one in an EV. The EV stop is at Moto Reading eastbound, and that's why I wanted to extend my range to reach that particular services in the previous video if you watch that. The internal combustion engine car stop, I decided not to stop at the motorway services themselves, but go to a very nearby industrial park where fuel is a lot cheaper. So this is at the Pinson's Kiln Industrial Park. It's right off the motorway, very close to that Reading services. One thing I would say is I recommend you hang around until the end of this video, because there's a bit more to this story than meets the eye initially. Here's a side-by-side comparison of the two videos that I made. Top left is me refuelling the Smart 4.2 and bottom right is me recharging the Renault Zoe. The clocks are going to start when the cars stop and we're ready to start. So, top left first, we'll look at the Smart 4.2. I've got to get out of the car, at which point I switch to a different camera view to show what's going on. And here I'm going to start the payment process. Bottom right on the Renault Zoe, I've opened the charge port cover. I'm going to pick up the handle and plug that in. That's where I start when I want to do recharging. And then I'm going to initiate the payment process on the charger. As it happens, the charger here accepts contactless, so payment is very slightly quicker in terms of recharging. Whereas for some reason this fuel pump on the top left required me to do chip and pin, which takes a little bit longer, but not an awful lot. Of course, it always feels longer when you're watching a video on the screen. And I am going to show the refueling in real time so that we can see that that's actually realistic. So, payment process is pretty much done here. And so I can now start actually refueling the car. In goes the fuel filler and the pump starts a few seconds later. I don't know if you'll be able to see this on the screen, depends how big the screen is you're watching on. But in fact, I only get about 18.5 litres in the Smart. I expected the tank to be almost empty at this point, but in fact there was still 1.5 litres left, and I don't have a countdown on the 4.2. This is a very early car. So I only get about 18.5 litres in of the 20 litres. But it's worth, of course, calling out that that is an extremely small tank. So this is a very fast fill, particularly because the tank is so small. Other people may take somewhat longer than this in order to refuel their cars just because it has a bigger tank. So the fueling portion is done. I just need to put on the fuel filler cap so that the car doesn't burst into flames as I drive down the road. Or that people can steal my fuel, of course, which is an occasional possibility. Just ask for a receipt at this point, just for my records. That only takes a couple of seconds. Now that I've got the receipt, I can jump back in the car and we switch back to the other camera view, which has been running in parallel. So you see me get in, and then once I'm ready to start the engine, you'll see the camera shake just a little bit, top left, which is the car starting. There we go. Put on the seat belt, and then we're ready to go and reverse out, give myself a little bit more space, and that's where the clock stops on the refueling. 2 minutes 55, not too bad. Actually a bit quicker than I expected. I thought it might take about 5 minutes overall. So what we can do now is we can concentrate on the recharging video. We don't need the other one anymore. And indeed, we don't need to watch all of this in real time. The car is merrily doing its charging, and there's not a lot to see until we get right near the end, where we'll slow back down again. Started to rain at this point, but you can see I've just popped my head in the car. This is me putting my drink down. And then I go to the charger and I press stop on the screen. And then I take a photo, in fact 3 photos of the screen, so that I've got them to put in after this video. 3 quick photos there. Try and get it lined up as best as possible. And with that done, then I should be able to unplug the car and close the port and the outer flap, and then put the charge back in its holster, jump in the car and switch it on. An EV is very quick to switch on, of course, so it's ready to go almost immediately. Just got to do the seatbelt while the windscreen wipers do their thing, and then we're ready to go. 21 minutes 53 before the car moves. So the first thing I should say about the EV stop is that I didn't fully recharge. I actually only put 25% in. Taking the car from 8% to 34%, I actually overshot a little bit. So why did I do that? Well, there are a couple of reasons actually, and it's worth just mentioning those here. The first reason is that there's actually a maximum clip duration on my video camera, and therefore I had to be careful that my recording didn't go over 30 minutes. Secondly, it will be difficult to condense all the information into this video if I made a longer recording, because the longer recording doesn't actually benefit the story particularly much. But mainly the reason was that that was all I needed to get home. Indeed, it was significantly more than I needed to get home. But I was doing a 2-for-1 in this particular case. I was doing a recharge because I needed a recharge, but I was also making this video. So I actually charged more than I actually needed to. Remember that DC rapid charging is expensive, particularly at the moment with the energy prices the way they've been. What I tend to do is I take what I need at DC rapid charger, and obviously a little bit extra, and then no more than that, because I can charge much more cheaply elsewhere. And here's one of the photos that I took. You can see I got to 34%, put in 14.7 kilowatt hours, very slightly more than I intended to. I started with 8% and wanted to put in about 13. So the comparison, 2 minutes 55 for refueling versus 21 minutes 53 for recharging. A big difference, and not only that, you can see that I went from 10 to 100 in the Smart, but only 8 to 34% in the Renault Zoe. So the stop for the ICE car was significantly shorter than for the EV, and this proves all the doubters right, surely. At this point I should pack up, I should stop the video, we should all go home. EVs are no good, they take too long to recharge, just forget it. But wait, did we compare like with like there? Let's look partway through that video again. So here we are partway through the video, just over a minute in, and you can see me doing my refueling thing in the top left-hand corner. But where am I in the bottom right-hand corner? I'm nowhere to be seen. And indeed, that's because I'm not there at all. I've gone into the motorway services to do something else, because I don't need to stand and wait for it to recharge. When I'm on a long trip, the car isn't the only thing that needs refueling. I'm a human being, and I need several things myself, so I will need a comfort break probably in a long journey. I may need a drink and possibly even a snack or a meal. But most importantly, what I need at that point is rest. I need an opportunity to think of something other than driving, to concentrate on the road and the cars around me, to let my brain recover. Driving is tiring mentally. I find it very tiring, and I'm sure a lot of people do. So probably we don't drive for thousands of miles at a time, or at least if we do, that might not be the safest thing that we could do. So refueling wasn't what happened at that ICE car stop. I didn't just stop for fuel. I needed a break as well. Let's take another look at that stop, considering the bigger picture of what actually happened. So here's what really happened on that refuelling stop. I pull onto the industrial park. Indeed, I've been on it about 30 seconds at this point. I spot a parking space, very handy parking space right at the end of a row there, so I jump in that. And now the clock started, because what I do at this point is I get out of the car and I have the break that I need. I need it to pop into McDonald's at this point. I need to have a comfort break and grab a drink because I'm pretty thirsty at this point. I grab a cold drink because that's the fastest that I can get from McDonald's. I did even consider going into Sainsbury's, but it's amazing how long it takes to get around a supermarket. So I reckon the fastest I could do was just to grab a drink in McDonald's and then throw that down as quickly as I could. Back to real time now, you can see me getting back to the car and putting my drink container just out of the way so that it's not going to get in my way as I'm doing the driving. And I can pull out of the parking space and move the car over to the fuel pump where it needs to be in order to do the refuelling. Now, of course, we don't have to watch this in real time because we've already seen what happens at the refuelling stop. But what's important here is that I'm calculating the total stop time. So we're watching the clock at the bottom of the screen in order to work out how long this stop actually took, rather than what we saw the first time round. Nearly done now. And there we are, reversing away at 16 minutes 19. That's the real stop duration when I did that one, rather than the 2 minutes 55 we saw in the first place. So here's the real comparison of those two stops. 16 minutes 19 seconds refuelling versus 21 minutes 53 seconds. We've already talked about the refill amount, but there they are again. But look at the difference here. The reason that there's a difference in the length of the stops is to do with the amount of break that I had, the amount of time when I wasn't doing anything. That was 11 minutes for refueling versus 18 minutes for recharging. That was mainly because I grabbed a cold drink at McDonald's rather than the hot coffee that I enjoyed during the EV charging. And it's fair to say that my mood was somewhat rushed during refueling, whereas it was a bit more relaxed during recharging. So as it happens, the stop in the EV was actually more enjoyable. It was more resting and more relaxed. But that is a self-inflicted mistake. I had the ability to take longer when I was doing the refueling, but I wanted to try and demonstrate how quickly I could do a stop, sort of in the shortest amount of time where I got everything done that I needed to do. I think we need to consider the time spent recharging and our stops in general in the wider context. We should not be driving for as long as the tank in an internal combustion engine car lasts, particularly if it's of any particular size, bigger than the Smart, for example. Even professional drivers are required to stop every 4.5 hours, and I think that's for 30 minutes. Personally, I need to stop much more frequently than that. That's both because I have a back problem, that means that it's better if I get out of the car and have a wander around, but also because I find driving extremely tiring, and I think a lot of people do, even if they don't necessarily acknowledge it. If you think in that wider context, then charging is actually pretty easy. There are lots of EVs on the market that can recharge to 80% in 30 minutes or less. That's actually pretty common now. Now, of course, there are cars that can't do that and will take longer, but they are starting to be in the minority. As it happens, the Renault Zoe is probably one of the slowest there is still on the market. The Zoe is a very old design and it is limited, as I've discussed in some of the other videos. And therefore, this is probably the worst case scenario of recharging, as long as the car supports rapid charging, which my particular Zoe does. So if you need to stop for 20 to 30 minutes for yourself, for your own good, and the car supports DC rapid charging, then the charging time isn't actually all that relevant. Also remember that road trips are only one particular type of charging. A charge that is not on a trip takes very little time at all because you're going to plug it in and just walk away. AC charging is the majority of my charging. Why would I not charge the car when it's sat idle doing nothing? Let's have a look at what that looks like. Open the charge port, work around the front of the car, remove the protective cover, pick up our cable and plug it in. And there we are, done. 8 hours later we come out to the car, we unplug the cable, close the protective cover and the locking flap, hang up our cable, walk to the car and drive away as normal. Now, I haven't measured it scientifically because I'm just not all that interested, to be fair. But I think high 90% of my charging is the AC charging, where I do what we showed in that latest video. And how do we measure the time of that? Is that the 30 seconds that I took to do something and then walked away, including the time to unplug it at the end? Or is it 8 hours and 30 minutes because it took 8 hours to recharge while it was plugged in? In a way, it sort of doesn't matter to me. Both of these are easier than refueling. I plug in and I have to do nothing else. With refueling, what I have to do is I have to stand there and hold the pump and do all those other things while that's going on. As it happens, it's also much cheaper to charge on AC charging, particularly at home, than it is to refuel. But I can't charge at home, I hear you shouting at the TV. And that's certainly true. There are a lot of people for which charging at home will not be an option. We think about 40% of households can't charge at home. For those people, AC charging near home is probably going to be the best solution to that problem. Charging the car when it's not being used avoids waiting. It is also cheaper to charge on AC than it is to charge on DC. So AC charging infrastructure is the stuff that you should be hassling your council about. If you don't have home charging, then what you need is an AC charger in your street or maybe in an adjacent street that you can use to recharge overnight. And that's where the council will get involved with private industry in order to start installing those chargers more and more in the local areas. There is, as it happens, one final sting in this particular tale. The recharging videos took me 4 attempts in total. I had trouble with the camera and I had to learn how to get the best out of the camera when it sat inside the car, particularly focus issues, although there was a failed recording as well. The refueling stop took 2 attempts to film. And the reason with that was nothing to do with the camera. It was because there were long queues at the pumps on the first attempt. I felt it was unfair to show you me waiting in a queue to get to a petrol pump, but I ended up waiting about 5 minutes in order to get to the petrol pump in the first place. And once I'd done that, I decided to scrap that recording and do it again. But I do think it's amusing that I had to wait to refuel the car when I didn't have to wait to refuel the EV. People worry, they call out the fact that long queues exist at recharging stations, and maybe very occasionally they do and they get sensationalised, but most of the time they don't. And of course the number of DC rapid chargers is going to increase dramatically as people need them. There's no point installing hundreds of very expensive DC rapid chargers, more than we already have, if they're not going to get used. Well, that's it for another video. Your comments and questions are most welcome in the section below. If you've liked the video, then it helps me if you click the thumbs up button. That tells YouTube that it's worth promoting to other people who might enjoy it. And of course, click subscribe if you want to see more. Thanks.